Hi everyone, I'm Tina. Welcome to today's session on understanding customer statements in Sage 50 accounts. I'll be your host for the next 45 minutes or so. I've previously delivered some report design sessions for invoice layouts, including some of the common queries were asked. So this time, the focus of the session is on customer statements, so you can see how these layouts are structured in Report Designer and how you can make changes to them. Bit of housekeeping before we get going, and you will be familiar with this if you've attended any of our webinars before. You'll notice you'll be automatically muted by GoToWebinar, which just means you can't physically speak to us during the session. You do have the opportunity to ask us questions though, which can be submitted via the questions panel on the right-hand side. Today, I have Abby, Jackie and Michael joining me to help answer your questions. And while we do try to answer all questions during the session, sometimes it's not possible. So if for any reason you don't have your question answered today, please take a look in the Sage Help Centre or contact our support team for further help. I've got some handouts available for you to download during the session via the handouts icon on the right, and these will also be available after the session in Sage City, along with a link to the session recording and the top questions asked today. So watch out for an email in around an hour or two with the links. So on the agenda for today, I'm going to start by explaining how the data shown on statements can differ between the statement layouts. And I'll show you how the structure of the layouts differ in Report Designer. We'll also look at some common amendment requests on statements and how the process may differ depending on the layout you're using. And finally, I'll touch on where you can get further support. When you access customer statements, you will find several different types of layout in the list. Most of these were originally designed for the various types of statement stationery that were available before the introduction of plain paper and email layouts. This list of statements can be broken down into two broad categories, which I'll explain to you now. Firstly, there are statements that show you individual lines of data. So if, for example, you raise invoices with several line items, maybe going to different nominal codes, the individual statement will show you each line item on an invoice. So if we have a look at the screenshot, we can see there are 4 line items, each with the same date of December the 1st and the same reference number of 79. We can see the individual details of each line item on the invoice. So in this example, apples, oranges, pears and grapes, along with the individual amounts. Secondly, there are statements that group together any line items with the same date and reference. So using the same example as before, we can still see invoice 79 on the statement, but rather than showing 4 line items, only a single line shows for the invoice. Rather than seeing any individual detail of what was sold, we see generic text of goods/services and the total amount of the invoice of £192. So when you're looking to choose a statement layout, the first question you need to ask yourself is, what level of detail do I want to show? Now, of these two options, the grouped statements are generally the most common, particularly if your invoices are always over several line items, so it keeps the number of pages on the statement to a minimum. It can also make it easier for your customers to reconcile if you're showing invoice totals rather than the individual amounts for each line. So let's say I decide on a grouped statement. What other considerations do I have? When I send my statements, do I want my customer to see all items? So this will include every transaction raised against the customer account within the statement date range. So for example, you'll see invoices, credit notes, all payments, any discounts and refunds. Or would you rather see only items that are currently outstanding or unpaid? This will include only transactions with an outstanding value in the customer activity. And I've popped a screenshot of this customer's activity on the slides just to show Only the values in the outstanding column are being picked up on the statement. On an outstanding item statement, the only customer transaction types that will ever appear are unpaid invoices, and these could be either fully or partly unpaid, and any unallocated credit notes, payments on account, or refunds. Again, the most common is the outstanding items only statement, and that's because the number of transactions shown on the statement will be fewer than the all items one. So let's focus now on how the statement layouts produce the data in the way they do, and what the common requests are for amendments. So I'm going to focus on the differences between the individual and grouped statement layouts in this section, because the only difference between the all items and outstanding item statements is that the outstanding items excludes any fully paid transactions. So I'm just going to switch over to my Sage 50 for you. And hopefully you should be able to see that on screen now. So from the customers module, I'm going to select a single customer for Fred Bryant. And then I'll select statements. So in here, I've got a couple of statement layouts already that I've marked as favorites, and I've based these on one of the plain paper statements available. So I'm going to start off with the individual one first, and I'm just going to preview that for you. And I'm just going to pop a date in to limit the transactions of the 1st of October 2022. Just make that a little bit bigger. So I'm going to start from the top of the statement and work my way down. So at the top, I can see the company details, followed by the customer details, and then I've got some titles for the actual statement data itself. If I scroll down a bit, I can see a brought forward balance item line, and that would show a value had any balance prior to the 1st of October been unpaid. Underneath that, we can see the individual line items on the statement, and these are going to be for the period the statement was run for. So we can see 4 line items for invoice 79, and we can see 2 line items for invoice 78. If I scroll down a bit further, at the bottom, I can see the total amount due at the bottom right, and including where each part of that balance currently sits within the aging periods. So we can see I've got 192 owing in period 1 and 48 in period 2. If I click Edit at the top of the screen, we'll see how the layout appears in Report Designer. Again, I'm going to start at the top and work my way down. So starting with the first section, which is the account ref header, this contains the company details, the customer details, and the titles for the data below. Moving down to the details section, this contains the data for the statement item line. So if I just hover, we can see there's the date, the invoice reference, the details, etc. And then we'll have the amounts over at the right-hand side. The next section is the date flag footer, and this is the one that contains any data for any brought forward balance on the statement. Next, I have my account reference footer, which contains the total amount due at the bottom right, and there we can see the aging periods there just to the left. And if I scroll down, you will find that there is a final account reference footer on the layout, but this won't have any impact on what I'm showing you today. So for the session, we're just going to disregard this. So if I open the Report Explorer panel at the right-hand side, I'm just going to minimize that, we can see the sections that are available to this layout. I'm just going to pin this just so it doesn't keep disappearing on us. And what I can see in here is that I've got 3 groups on the layout. I can tell I've got 2 account reference groups, and that's because I have 2 account reference header and 2 account reference footer sections. I also have a date flag group on there because I can see one date flag header and one date flag footer section. Now, not all sections in Report Explorer appear on the layout design to the left. Sections can actually be hidden if they're not needed. So if, for example, I select the date flag header from the Report Explorer and then open the Properties pane, I can see the visible property on this section is set to false, and that means it doesn't appear on the layout. Now, we're often asked to add company logos to statements and also bank details to let the customer know how they can pay. Now, I do cover adding logos and text boxes in the report design session for invoices, but for those of you who've not yet seen that session, I will briefly demonstrate these for you now. So I'm just going to scroll back up to the top. So to add a company logo at the top of the statement, select Add Image/Logo from the toolbar at the top, and then move your mouse into the area you'd like to add your logo. I can now click and drag a box in the account reference header section to the approximate size I want the logo to appear on my layout. Once I release my mouse, a window appears. And I'm going to leave the Browse My PC or Network for an Image selected before I click OK, which will then let me browse to the location of my logo file so I can select it. So I'm on my desktop at the moment and there's the Sage logo. So I'm just going to click on that and I can see a nice little preview of that at the right-hand side. Now I'm going to click on Open and there I can see the logo is added to the layout. So nice and simple. If I want to, I can resize it by clicking and dragging on any of these boxes around the outside of the logo. So I can make it bigger or I can make it smaller. And then if I want to move it around, I can simply click and drag on the logo to get it into the right position. If you struggle a bit with your mouse control, your direction arrow keys on the keyboard do exactly the same thing. So you can move it down, up, left, and right. So that's the logo done. I'm just going to scroll to the bottom of the layout into the account reference footer where I can see the totals. Now to add payment details, I'm going to do this via a text box. So I'm going to go back to the toolbar at the top and click on Add Text. Again, I'm going to move my mouse into position into the section. You can see that's now a plus sign. I'm just going to click once and then I'm going to start typing immediately. So I'm going to start typing in payment by backs to, and you can see the text box automatically extends as I type. I create a new line in the box by pressing the Enter key on the keyboard, and I'll carry on typing the sort code and the account number. If I click away from the text box, this will exit edit mode. And what I can now do is to click back on it and make any formatting changes if I want. So I can change the font to Tahoma. And if I want to, I can also make it bold if I want it to stand out. So if by doing any formatting changes, you find that you lose some text, which I have, because you can see the account numbers being chopped off at the right-hand side, all you need to do is to double click on the text box and it will automatically resize for you. I can then click away, and if I need to move it around, I can just click and drag or use my arrow keys on the keyboard. Okay, so I'm going to save my changes now and I'm going to preview the statement. So I'm just going to select my customer as being Fred Bryant, so we're looking at the same data. And again, I'll just limit the date range to the 1st of October up to date. So there's my logo at the top right, and if I scroll down to the bottom, there's my backs details at the bottom left. Now, I'm aware that I've just demonstrated these briefly, so I have added links to the relevant Help Centre articles on adding logos and bank details to the slides for you. The recording on personalising invoice layouts is also available for you to watch from the Sage Help Centre, and this includes additional information on adding lines, boxes, and data fields. Now, we're also often asked to put the statement transactions in date order. So currently, the transactions are just in the order in which they were added in Sage. So we can easily change the sort order on an individual statement layout. So I'm going to go back into Report Designer. And if I hover over the date field in the details section, I can see the field being used to show this on the statement is audit split date. So that's what I'm going to add my sort on. So from the report menu, I'm going to select sorts, and then I'm going to click on add. I'm going to change the table to audit split, and the variable or data field I'll select is date. If I wanted to sort in reverse order, I could change the sort order from ascending to descending, but I'm just going to leave it set to ascending, and then I'll click OK to add the sort, and then OK again to close the sort window. So when I preview the statement now, I'll just zoom in a bit. I can see the transactions are now displayed in date order. So I'm going from the 1st of October through the 20th, the 31st, right down to the 1st of December. Currently, I have two different transactions dated the 15th of November. I have reference 78 appearing before reference 22. So if I'd rather these displayed in reference order within each date, I can add a second sort to the layout. So back in Report Designer, I'm going to hover over the reference data field, and I can see that that is audit split INV ref. Just hover over that again so you can see that. So I'm going to go back to report, back to sorts. There's my existing sort, so I can add a second one. So I'm just going to click on add. This time I'm going to select audit split INV ref. So if I hit my letter I on the keyboard, it takes me down to that area in the table, and I'm just going to click on INV ref. I'm going to click OK, and then click OK again. So when I preview the statement now, again, I'll just zoom in a bit. So we can see it's still sorting initially in date order, but within the 15th of November transactions, reference 22 now appears before reference 78. So we can see these two sorts have been applied correctly. So I'm just going to go back into Report Designer, and then I'm going to save my changes to the individual statement layout. So let's close this now, and we'll take a look at the grouped one instead. Okay, so I'm going to preview this layout again for the same date range. So from the 1st of October. Again, I'll just make that a bit bigger. So when you have a look at this, you will see that it's very similar, although we do see fewer line items. Because the grouped statement, remember, it just shows invoice totals and not individual line items. So again, taking invoice 79 as an example, we don't see any detail of what was sold. The individual statement showed us detail of apples, oranges, pears, and grapes, with separate values for each. This statement shows us a single line with generic statement text of goods/services, and we also see the total invoice amount for £192. This generic statement text can be amended in the software to suit your business. So I'm going to close the preview. I'm also going to close the layouts list, and then I'm going to go into the settings menu, customer defaults, and then statements. In here, we can see what text will display on grouped statements for invoices, credits, discounts, and payments. So I'm just going to change the text from goods/services to invoices, and then I'll click OK. I'm going to preview that same statement again, just so you can see the data has changed. So now we can see what previously said goods and services has now been replaced with invoice. If I click Edit at the top of the screen, we'll have a look at the layout within Report Designer. And at first glance, you might think the grouped statement layout looks the same as the individual one, because we've still got 5 sections on there. The sections that are the same are the account reference header, the date flag footer, and again, we've got the 2 account reference footers. So where this layout differs is that this time we don't have a details section on the layout design. On the grouped statement, the main statement data is held in a header number footer section instead of a details section. And this is how the grouped statement shows only a single line for each invoice rather than each line item showing separately. And that's because it's grouping all line items for the one invoice together by the first transaction number in the invoice. And that's also known as the header number. So in the Report Explorer panel at the right-hand side, this time we can see there are 4 groups on the layout in comparison to the individual layout that only had 3. Again, we've got 2 account ref groups. We've got 2 account ref headers and 2 account ref footers. We have 1 date flag header and a date flag footer. And this time we can see we also have a header number group on there because we have 1 header number header and header number footer section. So as we saw before, not all sections in Report Explorer are shown on the layout design itself. So this time, if I click on the details section and then have a look in the properties pane, again, we can see that the visible property for the details section is set to false. So the section is still there behind the scenes. It's just hidden from view because we don't need it on this layout. So sorting the data on a grouped statement layout is a slightly different process than I showed you on the individual statement. I'm just going to pop back to the slides to explain this to you before showing you how to achieve this in Report Designer. So just bear with me. So to sort data on a grouped statement, you must add new groups to the layout rather than new sorts. Sorts only work on a report or layout when the details section is visible and in use. So on the grouped statement, I've just shown you that the details section is hidden. So we can't just go into report and sorts to add the sorts like we did with the individual statement. Now you do have a couple of options here and you just need to decide which one is the easier for you. If you currently have a Sage Cover contract, there is a backup of layouts available for you to download from the Sage Help Centre. And I've added the link to this article in the slides, which gives you instructions on how to download and install the layout files into your data location. This will give you several variations of grouped statements in both date and invoice reference order shown on the right. Now, if you'd customized your statement layout, so this is the one that you previously used, you would need to make these changes to the new layout that you've selected from here. So if, for example, you needed to add your logo again, or if you had a text box on for your bank details. If, however, you've already customized your statement layout and you've done quite a bit of customization, it might actually be quicker for you to make these changes to your existing layout manually. So instead of adding sorts for audit split date and audit split invoice reference on the statement, you're going to add groups instead. And that's because when a group is added to a layout, it automatically forces the data to be sorted in that order. So I'll explain the process first on the next slide, and then I'll demonstrate how you can do that in Report Designer. So manually changing the sort order on a grouped statement is a three-step process. Step 1 is to add a new group or multiple groups if multiple sorts are required. Step 2 is to move the new group or groups into the correct position, and that's basically to make sure the data sorts in the correct order. And step 3 is to hide any empty sections. So we won't be using any of the sections created by the groups. We're just adding them to force the data to sort the way we want to, so we can hide any new sections added for that group. In Report Explorer, we've seen the current sections on the layout appear like this. So if we add a group to sort in date order, the sections will need to appear like this. So we can see that the audit split date header needs to be sitting above the header number. And if we add a second group to sort in invoice reference order after date order, the sections need to appear like this. So we can see the date group is first, the invoice group is second, and then the header number group is third. So I've added these images to the slides so you can compare the order of the sections in your layout design to how they need to look to sort correctly. Basically, any new groups added need to sit above the existing header number group, which is how the statement data is currently sorting by transaction number. And I'll show you how to do this in the software now. So I'll just go back to my Sage 50 accounts, and you should be able to see that I'm back in Report Designer. So I'll start by adding the first group I need a sort for, which is audit split date. So to do this, I'm going to go to Sections, and then Add Section, and then I'll select Group, Header and Footer. So I'm going to focus on the Fields section at the bottom right. So I'm going to expand the Audit Split table, and then I'm going to look for the field Date. So again, if I hit the letter D on my keyboard, it takes me to that area. So once I've selected Date, I'll double click on it, and there it's added into the panel on the left. Now, before I click OK, I want you to focus on the Report Explorer pane at the right-hand side. So when I click OK, the header and footer sections for Audit Split Date have been added either side of the Details section. Now, because I want the statement to sort in date order first, before the current sort of transaction number, I need to move the date group to sit above the header number group. To move the date group up, in Report Explorer, I'm going to select the date header. And I can either go to the Sections menu and then select Move Section Up. Alternatively, I can click on this little up arrow at the very right-hand side of the header section bar. Again, if you focus on the Report Explorer pane down here, when I click on the up arrow, you should see that the date group is now sitting above the header number group. And that means the statement data will now print in date order rather than transaction order. So just to show you that, I'm going to preview the statement again for Fred Bryant. From the 1st of October. And I'm just going to zoom in a little bit. So if I scroll down, don't worry about the gaps between the dates. They're only there because I've not yet hidden the date header and footer. But what we can see is that the data is sorting in the correct order now. So again, as I run through, we can see the date order is sorting correctly. So I'm going to go back into Report Designer to tidy up the gaps left between the data. So back in Report Designer, I'm going to get rid of these two empty sections that we basically don't need. So I'm going to click on the date header, And then I'm going to go into the Properties pane, and I'm going to change the visible property from true by just clicking on the arrow at the right-hand side and then changing that to false. I can double click there and it'll automatically change. It's just a matter of preference. I'm going to repeat that for the date footer. So I'm going to click on that and I'll just double click here this time, just so you can see that it changed to false. So I'm going to preview this again. And this time you can see that the gaps are gone, but the date order is still preserved. So we're going from the 1st of October down to the 1st of December. Now, if by adding that date sort is enough for you, you could close Report Designer and save your changes. But if we look at the transactions dated the 15th of November, we have the same problem as we had earlier. These are not currently sorted in invoice reference order because we've got 78 before 22. So again, I can force a second sort by repeating the process of adding a group and moving the section. So I'll just show you that process again for recap. So go back into Report Designer and I'm going to go to Sections, Add Section, Group Header and Footer. So this time I'll show you a different method of adding the group data field. So rather than using the Fields panel at the bottom right, I'm just going to click in the main panel and start typing the word audit. So you can see a drop-down list appears. So if I can now just scroll down and then select Audit Split, it appears in the window. If I now press my full stop key on the keyboard, another drop-down list appears containing the data fields for the Audit Split table. If I press my letter I on the keyboard, it will take me to that area of the table. There's invoice reference, so I'll just select that. And again, that appears in the window. Again, I'd like you to focus on the Report Explorer panel at the bottom right there, because when I click OK, we can see the invoice reference header and invoice reference footer sections have been added either side of the details section. Now, because I want my sort order in date order first, then invoice reference order, I need to move the invoice reference group up to be above the header number group. So this is exactly the same as I did with the date group. So I'm going to select the invoice reference header group. I'm just going to scroll down a bit there. So invoice reference header group is selected. Again, keep an eye on this at the right-hand side. And when I click the up arrow, we can see the invoice reference group is now sitting above the header number group. So before I preview, I'm just going to hide these empty sections. So I'm going to hide the invoice reference header by changing the visible option from true to false. And I'll do the same with the invoice reference footer. So I'll preview this now. Just zoom in a little bit. So again, we can see that firstly, we're still sorting in date order, but secondly, within transactions with the same date, we're now sorting in invoice reference order. So that's that done. So if I go back into Designer, I'm just going to save my changes. So I have one last amendment to show you on grouped statements for today. So if you're not a fan of seeing the default statement text on your grouped statements for invoices and credit notes, you can change the data field on the statement layout to show the detail of the first line of data on the invoice instead. So I'm just going to remind you, if I preview this statement as it is now, we can see that invoice 80 shows the word invoice and reference number 22 shows the word credit. So if I go back into Report Designer, and just scroll down a bit, the data field being used is Audit Split STMT text STMT, basically meaning statement text. If I double click on this data field, what I can do is actually replace it with a different data field that's going to show me the data from the first line of the invoice. So I'm just going to click clear at the bottom left, and I'm going to replace it with the data field for audit header details. So I'm just going to type the word audit and then select audit header, press the full stop, and then just start typing DET. There's details, click on that. So we've now there got audit header details. So if I click OK, and then if I preview the statement layout again, so now we can see is rather than reference 80 showing the word invoice, we can see the narrative of the first line within that invoice, which for this one was pears. And then we can see for the same for reference 22, that was pears, but 78 and 79, we can now see apples. So again, for you, this is purely a matter of preference. So some of the statement layouts will display the STMT text data field by default. Others will show you the details data field. So you can easily change one with the other to suit what your preference is. So that's us done for today. So I'm just going to go back to the slides just to do a bit of recap with you. So just remembering what we've seen today is that the individual statement layouts will display all line items for each invoice on a statement, whereas the grouped statement layouts display a single line item for each invoice on the statement, and by default, they use default statement text of goods/services, for example. This grouped statement text can be changed via settings, customer defaults, and statements. And referencing sorts, the sort order of data can be easily changed on an individual statement by adding sorts to the layout. If you're wanting to change the sort order of data on a grouped statement, a little bit extra work into it, you need to add groups to the layouts for each sort required, reposition them in Report Explorer, and then you can hide the sections that aren't needed. So as well as the links to the additional Layouts Pack article I've shown you today, I've added some links to the Reporting Support Hub in the Sage Help Centre. I've added the interactive tables and variables article if you need to identify which variable you need to add to a layout. And there's also a link to all you need to know about our report design service should you need us to design a report or a layout for you. So hopefully you have more of an understanding now between the various statement types in the software and how you can make changes to the sort order on each type. So that brings us to the end of today's session. Please feel free to stay around for the next couple of minutes if you're waiting for an answer to a question or if you've got anything further to ask. If you've got what you need and want to leave the session, I'd just like to thank you for joining me today. And if you can't spare a minute to complete the exit survey for me, that would be much appreciated. Remember, you'll receive an email in around an hour or so with links to today's content, so you can revisit what I've shown you today if you'd like to. So I'm just going to pop myself on mute just to see if I can help with any questions. Okay, so it looks like the team are up to date with questions. So thanks, Abby, Jackie and Michael for your help today. And thank you all again for joining me. I look forward to seeing you on a future session very soon. Take care. Bye for now.